Or I can
Uh,
start. I can start. It doesn't matter.
go ahead and start. And unknown, if you are one of our panelists, you can go ahead and chat with me, and I can figure out who you are.
Well,
Go
great.
ahead.
Well, I want to say, Ulioni, thank you for asking me to come and speak with you. I love doing interactive type conversations. That way, I'm not talking about the whole hour or the 15 minutes or whatever it is. Um, but I want to explain I'm the chief of the Nulhegan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation, and I represent one of the largest Abenaki tribes in Vermont. And we have territories all over Vermont, New Hampshire, lower part of Canada, over to Moosehead Lake, Maine, down to about Turner's Falls, Mass. That's all of the Abenaki, Western Abenaki territory. The Eastern Abenaki are friends over there in Maine, and I'm glad to see that you will have someone from the Passamaquoddy on. And I also welcome all Native people that are not from originally from our land, but they're all welcome and they are here now and they're all part of our community. So I appreciate that for anyone who's joining, especially Beverly. You know, we value her being here. And so some of the things that we deal with that are challenging in this day and age, besides COVID. I mean, the COVID thing is challenging everybody. But when it comes to the COVID situation, you know, we're 3 to 4 times higher or more vulnerable than Europeans, along with the African American community, to actually contract COVID. And a lot of that is because of health disparities. Some of it could be from lack of access to different things to keep us safe, whether it be, like I said, health health disparities, genetics, food sovereignty is another issue that we run into all the time. Lateral violence, hate is still pretty prevalent in this day and age, as you've seen on the national stage. There's a lot of people. They're not as cordial as they used to be, and we fight constantly against dehumanization. It's actually gone past racism into dehumanization. I say that because when I mentioned to you that if you, it seems to be okay that you have like sports teams that are named after Native, like the Redskins, or portray Native people, and they wear, people in the stands have regalia on and do the red face and do the war chops and all that stuff. People don't seem to blink an eye because that's been socially acceptable, at least to the European population, but not to us. And so it doesn't shock anyone. But if you say take a different ethnic race and apply the same standards, like for instance, if someone painted their face black and called a team maybe the blacks or the Africans, and then they put on regalia that represented that nation, there would be quite an uproar, right? Because that would be socially unacceptable. But when people do that around Native people, it seems that we're too sensitive, right? We're called too sensitive, or they're trying to honor our warrior spirit or some other stuff to try to justify it. And so that's why I said it's gone past racism to dehumanization. We're the only race of people that can't self-declare. We don't walk up to people and say, "How white are you?" or "How African American are you?" or any type of other race. But they do that with Native people. Like, how Indian are you, or how much Indian are you, or so let me see your status card, right? And unfortunately, only dogs, horses, and Indians need a pedigree in this country to prove who they are. So that's a huge issue that I don't know if we'll ever overcome. I think also it's one of the big important things we need to do as a people is assert our sovereignty, not wait for someone to recognize our sovereignty. We have to assert our sovereignty, and that's the way we're going to make change, is continue to assert who we are, continue to show that we're still here, continue our programs that help our people, whether it be from a food insecurity or a health disparity aspect or cultural or our language or any of those things. It's very important that we continue to do those things ourselves and appreciate anybody who decides to help us. But we can't rely on other people to fix our problems. We have to do it ourselves. And we just hopefully gather enough support to make it long lasting and standing. So I think the biggest challenges that I see is, like I said, the food insecurity and health disparities, the oppression and the lateral violence, hate out there. Our voices aren't often heard in the sea of other minority or other minority populations. And I think asserting ourselves, fixing our problems with the help of others is probably another point that we have to do. So like I said, I do appreciate all Native people that are here. We're all in the same boat. And I think we all have a lot to give and share. Anything else that?
Aziz has a question in the chat.
Okay. Do you want me to follow the chat as well? I can follow the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There's also been some work around Indigenous sovereignty. Yep. When I say Indigenous sovereignty, we are sovereign. So like I said before, we have to assert our sovereignty. That's one of the things that you've seen. We've asserted our hunting and fishing rights. Recently, we were able to attain our hunting and fishing rights. As you know, the Commission on Native American Affairs spearheaded the changing of state parks signs to include Abenaki names. We continue, like I said, to assert our government-to-government relationships. I won a federal lawsuit against the Department of Interior so we could carry eagle feathers, just like federal tribes would be able to. So we continue to assert our sovereignty. So the next question is, I'm wondering about your thoughts on how in many Indigenous communities, the land is held by the government in trust, which makes it difficult for the natives to leverage them in collection of loans, and they will use to set up businesses. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, about 56.2 million acres of land are held in trust by the federal government. This in turn has resulted in stunted economic growth. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I see this being a twofold issue for problems. If land is granted to Native communities and they're put in trust, you basically have hit the nail on the head. Because those lands are considered sovereign reservation areas, then those lands have to be governed by the people who are in those reservations. But the problem that lies there is many people are poor. A lot of the communities are poor. So in order to create and pay for those infrastructures, there are two things. You either rely on the government to provide those grants for you, and they can give them or take them away at any time, which you already saw last year or two ago when the Cherokee were going to excommunicate all of the Black Cherokee, and they threatened to take federal grants away if they did that. But luckily, the Cherokee exercised their sovereignty and said, well, if we lose grants, we lose grants. But people are dependent upon those. Or if you're a poor community, you have to get investors to build something that'll gain revenue. And then you owe your I don't want to say your soul, but you owe a lot to those investors, and they own everything, and they pay you more or less stipends and hire your people. But those are the people who set up all the car dealerships, the banks, the stores, because as you know, people can't go on reservations and repossess anything. So most investors outside of those reservations aren't going to invest. So who puts up those things? The investors who invest in casinos or factories or whatever else, and then they end up owning most of your land. So are you really sovereign at that point? Because you're relying either on your investors or you're relying on grants in order to keep your infrastructure going. And a lot of reservations are poor, and that's it's sad. Um, is there a way? Well, and like I said, in our case, I think any land that's held in trust, you have to be a federal tribe. Even the Wampanoag was turned down for putting their land into trust recently, I believe, and they are federal. Um, so, which would have helped with their tax breaks. So I think in Vermont we don't have any. I don't know of any Abenaki lands held in trust. We do have lands, like we have lands um, up in Barton, Vermont, that's owned by the tribe. There's Brunswick Springs that's owned by all our people. There are various places around Vermont that are owned, so they're not held in trust by the state. When I said twofold, the good thing is if lands are held in trust, they can't be taken by individuals or by certain councils unless it's set up properly, because those are reserved forever. If you have lands like what we've seen in Vermont before, you can have some tribes who happen to be in power. They sell the land to their people for $1 or something, and then they no longer are tribal lands anymore. They become individual lands, which has been sad. We've seen that in the past. So we have easements on ours, so it can never be taken. So let's see. I don't know if you want me to keep going through this, or do you have other presenters? I mean, do you want to moderate this, Kelsey? Do you want me to keep going?
Well,
other people?
I've been trying to get in contact with our other panelists, and I haven't heard much from them. But not
Okay.
everyone on the in the call has their name on there. So if one of our panelists is in there as either as the unknown or as the phone call in there, go ahead and speak up, because I don't know who you are.
If not, I can continue. Just let me know.
I suppose if you're good with this, and we can keep going like this as well. I'm sure people have questions, and if you don't, those in the the unknown is Melissa. So that is not one of our
Okay.
panelists.
Well, I'll keep going until we have the other panelists. Let's see. Are there ways in which you have seen financial institutions that are working to alleviate these inequities in Native communities? The answer is no. They're very. I have never dealt with a financial institution. If you're talking financial institution in a way of banks or those kind of investors, no. We've had a lot of help from people like the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Community Foundation, and other philanthropy type organizations who are willing to invest in our needs, to be able to help with our food security programs and buying land and those kind of things. I kind of changed the way we look at things, because see, Native people didn't believe in land ownership, and because you can't own something the Creator didn't give you, right? You could only be stewards over that land. So we were told that as long as we were good stewards of the land, the land would provide for us if we were good stewards of it. So that's what we did. And because we could kill things, we had an added responsibility to help protect the other web of life, things that were on the web of life, the animals and the environment and those kind of things. So I looked at, because the Europeans get really skittish about you taking something away from them, which is ironic because they took it from you when took the stewardship away. I looked at it as, what did our ancestors use land for? They used it to collect food. They used it to collect medicines, to hunt and fish, and to get materials to help them in their everyday lives. So if you ever go to our website, abenakitribe.org, you'll see under partnerships where I've actually partnered with Like the state of Vermont, I have access to all the state park and recs. I have access to all the agency natural resource lands, the fish and wildlife lands, to be able to hunt, gather, and collect materials. I have private licenses to access, like Trans Canada and First Light lands and other just individuals. So you can go there and see all the licenses and permits that we have. So it's a different way of looking things. I'm providing the same thing to our people that our ancestors were able to do, because we didn't own it then and we don't own it now, but we have access to it, if that makes sense. So would it be great to have our own land where nobody could ever tell us to leave or to go? Then I would say yes, we would love that, but that's not feasible, and sometimes, unless we work with partners to actually get the land. And we do have a bill in, hoping that we will be tax exempt. So let's see. I think Karen had a question. How can I, as a Black man who is heavily involved in social justice work, assist in advocacy for these issues that persist to this day? Is there a way Native and Black Americans could work together to pursue greater equality? I want to do all I can. I am in Kentucky and have tried to reach the Thunderbolt, Cherokee, and Shawnee here, as well as the Mississippi Band and Choctaw. Thought I have been unsuccessful. Here in Vermont, I work closely with Tabitha Moore, who is the president of the NAACP chapter in Rutland. We also work with Social Justice Vermont. So we do try to collaborate on working together. The problem that we run into is everybody has specific, even though we have needs that are the same, because we're all oppressed, we have sometimes different agendas or different needs. And we vary and we veer off. The problem that we run into is that we don't have the population that Black America has. I think in Vermont, we have like 0.2% is Native and 4% is Black. It's not African American, because not everybody's from Africa. So I always use Black as a term. So they have the numbers that when they call a social justice movement, they can call people from all over the country to say, hey, I need you to come here and help support us and help protest or help do these kind of things. Or we need a letter writing campaign, or they have the organizations, the national organizations, to support them in their movement, so they can hire full-time staff to be able to do that. The only way we increase our numbers is by birth. So it's very hard. And if we protest and we get labeled, then it closes the doors. We can't move from organization to organization, like say Vermont Justice or NAACP or something. Like if something gets shut down, you can shift to a new organization and start over. We can't kind of do that. We're Abenaki or Abenaki. We can't change. So where we run into a problem is because the voices are so much louder, they often muffle ours, right? So we keep getting further and further down the rung, while other minorities who have louder voices get more things accomplished. So it's kind of one of those things where we have to assert our sovereignty again as a government to government relationship to keep a seat at the table, because we don't have the voices as an organization, a national organization that could rise up to the level. Like we have more Black Lives Matter flags flying in Vermont than we do Abenaki or Native flags, right? Just because the voices have been louder, it catches on, and Native people are still in hiding. So I think you find, to answer your question, I think you find a lot of distrust when it comes to Native people have been suppressed by not only white Americans, but Black Americans too, right? I mean, Buffalo soldiers killed us just as much as European white soldiers killed us. There's always been that fear of lateral violence and oppression. So I think it takes people like you to bridge those gaps and to do as much as you can to try to allow Native people to know that A, you're not a threat, and B, you're not trying to use us for some other purpose. And I think that's I think by partnering and speaking with people, I think that'll help. So I'll move from that subject. Kelsey, you can just tell me when other people pop in, and I'm going to keep going. Okay.
Yep,
How do
no
Native
problem.
governments and administrators differ from state or county governments? Is it possible for them to be set up to defend against corrupt members selling native land to become personal lands? And you mentioned earlier, yes, it can be done. Nulhegan is one of those people who have done that. We are a government, and government people are elected by their citizens. The thing about Native people is Native people traditionally were governed by families. So the head of each family would elect someone from that family to represent them. So a tribal council would be made up of multiple families, right? To conduct business on behalf of their family. And if you didn't like what they did, you could take your family and leave. Now, Nulhegans is still set up that way, where our tribal council represents our families, and then they tell me what they would like to do, because I'm the face. I was elected to do something on their behalf. But the way the government forced Native people to be in a mold of you must have a chief and a tribal council and a legislative judicial branch, they set it up as if it was a European government, right? Even though it's a government to government relationship, we didn't have a judicial branch of government. We didn't have a legislative branch. We voted based on our elders, our family members, and our pipe carriers, right? So we put things in place that when we get land, we use the European system to put in easements on our deeds, so nobody could ever take it from us, because it's set up in a way that nobody would ever want it, because we can still access it anytime we want, no matter who owns it. Where we run into problems is where one family becomes dominant and they remove all of the other tribal councils by stacking the vote and electing all their family into the council and pushing other people out. So then that family becomes in charge, and they do everything they can to maintain the power. And then those people then, since they're family, can then sell assets or give them to their other family members, right? So then they become family land and family stuff instead of a communal. So that's a danger of also Native government, is because depending upon how it's set up and how your government is structured, like if you say is a person from each head of each family could be nominated to be in, and no more than two people from the same family could be on the council at the same time, then you could limit the power one family would have over another. And that's why in our place, you've seen like one tribe where one family will be in power, they'll throw another powerful family out, and vice versa, and then you have factions and splits. And so the answer is yes, we could set it up. But the way we govern, a lot of people have lost that. And when you try to follow the European structure, then we run into trouble. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people have made. How effective have you found letter campaigns to be in your personal experience? I don't think letter campaigns have been really effective. I think more it's partnerships, like me talking to you or myself talking to an organization. Like if I always said, it'd really be great if Champlain College could really partner with us and do this. And then people like yourself would then go around your community to try to get that support. Like we did with our land, when we wanted land, then we got 350.org and the AFL-CIO, all of these people to sign on, and they got petitions and signatures showing that they had 1,000 people supporting us, right? Or whatever that case may be. So I think letter writing is okay, but I think it's numbers that matter. because that's what legislators care about. They care about who can vote me out, or is it the right thing to do, right? There's two ways to get something done. You either have to convince someone that they're doing the right thing and it's the best thing that they could do, or it's in their best interest because they have enough votes that could vote them out if they weren't doing something the way their constituents wanted. We never have had the amount of people to make a voting issue, so I convince legislators and other people of why it is the right thing to do or why they should do this. So let's see. This makes me wonder about AIM. Perhaps to hear your thoughts on how they work to address police brutality and settler colonialism might be relevant today. I think the American Indian movement, in our opinion, at least in the Northeast, there's a big chapter in New Hampshire. That's Abenaki and others. I think AIM was very effective in the 70s when the Voting Rights Act was happening. Not the voting right, but when they were trying to get equal rights for Black people, and Native people saw that they would be even further behind. So I think they joined in the 70s to try to assert Native rights along with the Black community, to try to work together to get our rights. And I think it was very effective and very powerful then. I'm not really sure how effective the American Indian movement is right now, just because they're kind of hamstrung, because people kind of ignore. They work more towards tribal leaders and tribal councils than they do organizations, unless they're powerful enough, like the Native American Law Foundation or something that could really bring things to bear, right? I think maybe it would be different if it was maybe out west, where you have a lot more Native power that the AIM could get behind and say, I have 50,000 Navajo people that are behind me, and they're not going to be happy with what you do. Right? That's a lot more powerful statement than I have maybe 4,000 Abenaki behind us in a state that's got 650,000 people. I don't care if you rally all of us, we're not going to be enough to make a difference. So I think they're good to get our voices out, but so it's not falling on one particular tribe or another. But I think they're limited in what they can do. Oh, let's see. I also wonder if there are any other regional or national indigenous movements that are working towards building a larger Native movement. I think, well, we're part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, but like I said, that's more on a grand scale to try to help individual nations or tribes when we can. They just had a meeting, emergency meeting this last week about some issues that are happening up in Wolastoquk area, which is in New Brunswick. They're not given status and something, so we were all communicating about that. I couldn't make the call, but we had representatives on that. So, but there's, like I said, there's also detractors because of the different levels: federal recognition, state recognition, and no recognition. Sometimes we get a lot of lateral violence from people saying, well, we're better than you because we're federally recognized, and the state recognized aren't as good at, so they don't get a seat at the table. And some people aren't recognized at all. So, you're not really real, you're just a fake Indian. We hear all that lateral violence stuff, which is craziness. Especially when it's not, like I said, it's not, no other race has to do that. So we work more with partners, with people like yourself or social justice organizations that are willing to support our cause. And like our food sovereignty program, we work with 3 colleges. We work with Middlebury, we work with UVM, we work with Sterling College, and Bennington's coming on next year to grow our crops and to help. We help them, we educate them on our culture, and they grow our crops, and we feed our citizens with it. So everybody benefits and we all win, because they have students that can help maintain those crops and help package them and do things. So it's working with people that do have the numbers that are willing to stand up for social justice because it's the right thing to do, more than it is inter-native tribal things, like government to government between native tribes. Let's see. What is your legal process? Well, like I said, our legal process is depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about a federal tribe, somebody might have their own judicial court systems, their own judges, their own things like that. We don't operate that way. Even though we're the largest tribe in Vermont, we have a legislative system, if you want to think about it, which is our tribal council, who makes the laws and kind of tells us which direction we go. We have a council of elders who are the wisest, who've been here the longest, who might know things, to oversee to make sure that the council is operating in a way that's in the best interest of the people, either making sure that they're using our language, our tradition, and our culture in order to legislate. If you want to call it legislate, it's make decisions. And then if there's a conflict between the two, then myself as chief will get the vote, the tying vote, to make a decision, because that's my job, is to represent the people. So we do it the old way. We do it in a way that consensus, and we do it in a way that we have a way for our council to decide something, and our elders to decide whether they're following the proper protocol. So we have a process, but it's a traditional process, not a like a jail, or I'm going to fine you $10, or or you're going to jail, or any of that stuff. And honestly, with the way Europeans set it up, is if a tribe doesn't have those things in place, the judicial system and the federal government trumps it. Even if you're on a reservation, if you don't have your own judicial system set up the way they like it, they trump it. So it's kind of they still have a lot of control. Let's see. Have you considered forming a Native community credit union to protect your members as they are cooperative? We don't have the capital. We don't have the means to do that. We've had people that try to get us to do our own money, and people that want to try to set us up, but there's always been an angle. There's always been an angle for somebody wanting to use us. So we've never gone down those investor roles because we know we would owe people, but we've never done that. We haven't considered it. Maybe someday, if we ever get revenue sources, because we don't even have full-time staff. I do stuff on my own. Other people do it, but we don't even have enough money to have full-time resources just to educate and to work in the community. So we got to get there first before we start, with a lot of the infrastructure. Then where would we put it? Our land that we own now is nobody can live on it, or it's a tribal forest land. I mean, you can't even live there. You can be there, but you can't live there. So until we get property that we can truly do what we want with, then we can start putting other infrastructure in. So as part of the problem, the extent of displacement that's occurred in the Northeast. Well, I don't think we'd ever want to be on a reservation unless we could really set it up the way that it would benefit people, instead of it becoming a poor area or something detrimental. But I think we were nomadic. We were traveling. We were on the front lines of the war, so we weren't afforded the reservation. All the people who, during the French and Indian Wars, when the French decided and the British decided to come to a peace agreement, a lot of the natives, Abenaki, went to Canada to live in Odanek, and because that's where reserve was, and it's still friendly territory. Us, we lived here. We didn't want to give up our homeland. This was our steward. So we did go into hiding. We did live in plain sight, as they say. We did mix with Europeans. So obviously our features are just, we have white complexions as well. So we were able to fit in, just like most Northeast tribes are. So some of it is that, and some of it is, we didn't have a home. It was all taken from us. I mean, so we don't have reservations today. So at least here in Vermont, I mean, Maine obviously has some, and they're fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. We were villages. We were based on villages and family units. I wonder about the relationship between police and Native people. I know that relationship across Native Reserve borders is strained, but I wonder about those. The only time we had problems with the police when people were trying to use illegal things like peyote, to do ceremonies, and really peyote is not weren't our sub. We don't have cactuses here. We didn't really use them traditionally, just like we didn't use marijuana traditionally. We always wanted to stay in our right mind. In fact, pipe carriers can't be under the influence of alcohol or any kind of mind altering drug because you always have to be there for the people. So we really weren't into mind altering drugs. But for the people who do, I mean, that was a problem, right? People who wanted to say, I use marijuana for medicinal purposes or spiritual or cultural uses, or we use peyote, which we didn't. I mean, we ran into problems with our teenagers with tobacco because people under 21 weren't supposed to use tobacco, but it's part of our culture is offering to use tobacco. So we ran into a bit there. We run into trouble more with the fish and wildlife because people are trying to use subsistence hunting to try to eat. Because most of my people live up Northeast Kingdom. It's a really poor area, and they lived off the land. Whatever they could grow and hunt and eat, that's what they did. So we had more problems with the fish and wildlife, and that's why I went for hunting and fishing rights, so we wouldn't have those problems. So it wouldn't be a cost of the license that would prohibit things. Lateral violence between tribes brings up an interesting question of relations between tribes today. Yeah, lateral violence is very prevalent. Like I said, if people, we have great relationships with people within tribes, citizens, tribal governments. There's a lot of lateral violence. I mean, Odanak and us, we're both Western Abenaki. They're in Canada. We're in Vermont. We don't work together. We don't get along. I mean, we try, but they wanted to move down and take our territory in Vermont, and we didn't want them to take our territory because we live here, so they don't like us that much. Because based on the French law up in Canada, was that they could go extinct, because they base it on blood quantum and also status, other types of status, where they were slowly going extinct. We didn't sign on to those treaties or those types of government relations. So they were trying to establish a beachhead here. So when they were no longer able to be in Canada, they could come here. But they decided to try to take it instead of work with us to be part of it. So when somebody tries to take something from you, instead of saying, hey, could we share, then it becomes a problem. Right. But we always hold our hope that we will work together, just like people on the coast that are federal tribes. They look at us sometimes as, because we're only state recognized, we're not really Indians, which is kind of crazy because we never did that in our traditional culture. We didn't walk up to you and say, could I see your Indian status card? We'd say, who are you and who do you represent? I mean, it would be as simple as that. I mean, we didn't have statuses. That's a European concept. And unfortunately, a lot of tribal people fall into that European mindset of status, which again, you got to decolonize your brain about how you're looking at things. How much power does an elder have in a council? Does it depend on whether the tribe is state or federally recognized? I think elders have a lot of power, but most elders don't sit on a council. Elders are elders, right? And when I say elders, I'm not talking about because you're old, right? Elders don't become elders by being old. You just become old. Elders are people who have gone through the proper ceremonies, who have fasted, who know their culture, that you feel confident that you could send someone there to get information and to get knowledge. And if that person doesn't know what that knowledge is, they will know how to get it. So an elder is a cultural bearer and knows our historical way of doing things. So I think whether you're state or federal, I think our elders are very important. Now, different people have different definitions of an elder. Some people might say because they're old, they're an elder. And our tribes, they're not just they're old. Doesn't mean they're elders. You have to respect everybody because they've been here longer than you have. But there are people know who those knowledge keepers are and who those people are. And our pipe carriers are the ones who are really respected because they're the ones who have been, I don't want to say ordained, but they're the people who have gone through ceremonies and actually work on behalf of the people. They pray for the people, they offer ceremonies for the people. Those are the people who are not just knowledge keepers, they're the medicine type, important people who work to help the people, if that makes sense. So there's pipe carriers on top of elders. And you just have to have that connection. So hope that answers your question. Let's see. Would you support reparations from the U.S. and Western European governments for the genocide they perpetrated against the American people? Yes, of course. We would take reparations as long as if they do it in a meaningful way and it's used in a meaningful way. In Vermont, there was a 1931 Sterilization Act. Most people don't know what's called the Eugenics Survey. My grandmother was listed in the survey and had to change her name 3 times. Now, she was a victim. I am a survivor. There's a difference. Where people run into problems when they cry victim all the time. I can't cry victimization for something that happened to my ancestors in the 1600s. Now, I can say that they were a victim, but I can say we survived that ordeal, because if my grandmother would have been sterilized, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So, and we don't use the victim mentality because somehow when you say you're a victim, you're somehow less than somebody else, or somebody owes you something, or somebody. When we say survivor, we say you should give reparations because it's the right thing to do, but also we don't want you to repeat history. And I'm on the same level as you are. I actually, our ancestors were really tough because they were able to survive what was done to them. We just don't want to repeat it. So our mindset is more in a survival mentality instead of a victimization mentality. But we would obviously want to be on an equal footing as other people, right? I mean, that's the goal, is equity. So if we can get reparations to be in an equitable position, of course we would do that. As long as it's done right. Okay, I appreciate your answers to all these. I'm assuming none of those others ever jumped on, right?
No, and for that I have to apologize. That's one of the problems with the COVID era, is that if people don't answer their email, they may as well have dropped off the face of the earth. So I'm sorry to sort of put you on the spot like this,
No.
but your answers have been really informative so
Hey,
far.
sometimes people accuse me of being long-winded, right? But I have everything. The reason I don't mind is, see, I work on a government-to-government level with other nations. Like I work with the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoqey, the Oneida, on that level. I also work with the federal government. I mean, I have contacts with our congressional delegations, and I also work on the state level. Like I work with as you know, I'm on the Attorney General Board of Racial Disparities. I work with the governor's office. I work with the lieutenant governor, who's now the past and present. I work with all the agencies, whether it's dealing with Indian child welfare, or whether it's dealing with the agents, our land, our environment, or whether it's got to do with food programs, agency of health, human services. I mean, I work with a gamut of things, and I work with the individual person who can't feed their family, or someone's taken their child away, or I can't heat my home. I mean, I go right down to the micro level of an individual. So think of me as a chief, as a mayor of a small town. Like I can have an individual come up and say, "Hey, Don, I really need this." Okay. Or I have, "Hey, we're doing this burial today. Can you help facilitate that?" Or, "Hey, we're hungry. Can you find programs to feed us, or can you get grants?" So I have people call me, and I never know what it's going to be, which is exciting because you never know what the next thing is, but it's also exhausting because you have to have a lot of knowledge of not only that, but your culture. I mean, I help teach, I help do lectures about our culture. So it's kind of like there's a lot to do. Let's see. Let's see. Appreciate your answers and all the questions about the role of public-private partnerships in helping to overcome some of these obstacles you mentioned. It seems like the issue is differentiated European and Native society coming conflict with. Yeah, well, the way I look at things is think about it in this way. People fear what they don't understand, right? So if you don't educate, only ignorance is left in its wake, right? So if you can educate people on being a partner and why it's beneficial to everybody to work together, then there's less fear. And when there's less fear, there's more cooperation, and it becomes easier for your children who might be in schools not to be willing to come out of the shadows to say, here I am. Because I've actually had citizens come to me and say, look, I look white to everybody who wouldn't know me. Why would I give up white privilege to identify as Native people and automatically be at a disadvantage? I could never take that back. And I said, well, because your people will go extinct and you'll lose your culture. It's not being Native is a way of life. It's not just carrying a card and saying, hey, I'm going to a powwow once a year. Because then it's no different than, why do you celebrate Hanukkah, but that's all you do? Right? Well, it's because tradition. We always put the 12 candles up. Well, do you know anything about that, or why you did it, or do you know anything about the culture? No, I'm Jewish and I put 12 candles up and that's what we do. I mean, so I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying is that every culture has to know where they came from and know the roots in order to truly live out that lifestyle and be connected to that culture. If it's a part-time thing and it's only once in a while, then you're not truly connected, right? So you're not really walking that red road or that red path. So you continue with a European mindset, just knowing that you are Native. So we do this because we have to if we want us to survive. And all the things that we do make it easier for our kids to be who they are. So if we fight the struggle, then hopefully it makes it more acceptable to be Native. And I have seen a culture shift. I mean, we have seen society moving to more acceptance towards Native people and actually Black America. I know that I can feel that there's been a change. Now, how much of that wave we can capitalize on and ride, we'll see. Or will the Native people get swallowed up by other minorities who have more power? That's to be determined. But by doing these kind of things with you and others, it keeps our voice still here. So we still exist. Okay, so what you were just saying, I wonder the current research into reparations for the Black community, what might be done to account for the injustices Native in Vermont. Well, see, that's the thing, right? We have the Black community put in reparations for slavery in Vermont because Vermont still had that language in their constitution, even though legally they can't own slaves. But in our constitution, it says anybody under the age of 18 or if you owed a debt or something, you could be still held as a slave, which would never happen because of federal law. But anyway, they were looking to change that law and to get reparations. Well, when people talk about reparations, a lot of people are talking about cash payments to individuals, right? I mean, how do you decide what person was here and who's owed the money and who, I think where we have an apology in for the eugenics who affected our people, which hasn't passed either yet. We did get an apology from UVM, so we're hoping this time it'll pass from the state. But we look at what can you do to help uplift our entire community. Like when they had the mural downtown, the big fight over that and how to get not reparations, but equality. I shifted it from worrying about a mural to how do I display our artistry where people can learn about us. So I put a display up in the Burlington International Airport where 1.4 million travelers usually go through so they could learn about us and school kids could go there. I don't care about a mural. I mean, I care about a mural, but by changing the mural doesn't change anything that has to uplift our people. right? You're correcting something, but it doesn't impact. So the black community were doing reparations, but didn't include us. So that tells you they were concerned about slavery. And people don't understand that we were slaves, but brought to Europe, right? Most people don't know that many Native people were captured and brought to the New World to show what was here. Not the New World, but the European countries, to show what was in the New World. And a lot of those people died, didn't make it, or if they did make it, they came back, and there were very few. So I think there's been a lot of wrongs done, and I think equality is the best, but we don't always work together because people have different agendas. It's sad, but it's just the way society is. Persistent myth that Vermont was empty before the arrival of Europeans. I wonder if this was myth has perpetuated, today in erasing Native voices. It was used because, you have to understand, anybody that used Native lands were supposed to pay Native people for those lands. Well, Ethan Allen, not only was he a commander of troops, but he also owned businesses. So he said Natives only traveled through here because if they didn't live here, he didn't have to pay them. But if they traveled through here, then he didn't have to because they didn't own the land, right? So he tried to eliminate us. Him and Ira Allen tried to eliminate us of actually being here, even though I used the eugenics records to show we never left. That's how I was able to get our recognition, because the Attorney General said, oh, we all left and went to Canada, right? And that's where Odenak said, oh, if we all went to Canada, then we own Vermont. Well, no. You don't own Vermont. We have Native people families here that never left. And here's the eugenics records of you tracking us to show that we never left. So we were able to show that we never left and we stayed here. So we've erased that myth, I hope, because we are recognized, we have proven ourselves, and we're here, and we had to show that we've always been here through our recognition process. So many people now realize that Odanak and Woolanak have their reserves in Canada, and the 4 tribes have their place here in Vermont, and we are distinctly separate entities, even though we are related as a people, if that makes any sense. Do you support education reform in schools? Absolutely. I think just before we go too much further, we tried to pass a bill called H.9 Ethnic Studies, which that bill passed, which is to educate people in the school systems, K through 12. That H.9 Ethnic Study bill passed, but it only passed to provide a committee to make recommendations that the Department of Education can adopt or not, right? We want people in Vermont, the school systems, to be required to teach about us, because not many people have learned about us. Not many people know we're still here. People know anything really about the Abenaki people, unless you were a teacher who cared about teaching about the true history, who would ask us to come in and teach. So we're trying to change that, but I'm telling you that right now, the school systems refuse to make it mandated to teach about us. They'll teach about the Trail of Tears. They'll teach about the first Thanksgiving. They'll teach about all of the things that are not here, but they won't teach about their local population. So that's really sad. But we're working on it. And yeah. I already asked my question. Okay. Did not know that. Okay. I don't know what that, I've talked so much, I'm not sure which one that was referring to. I appreciate your distinction between the two categorizations. This has been a great, I'm glad you guys are enjoying it, because it's about educating, and it's, you're our future. You guys are the next leaders, the next business owners, the next lawyers, and the next people who can impact minority populations. So I value the time that I'm spending with you, because you guys can make that change. You can make the environmental changes needed. You can make the social justice changes. And I appreciate, as someone older, helping guide that information, or at least giving you knowledge. What you do with it is your own. Let's see. See a lot of overlap with Muslim. Well, our spirituality system is we have one creator and many spirits. I'm also a clergyman, tribal clergyman, and I love having debates with people of Christian faith as well, or other faiths, because we are all the same. Gluskapi fell from the hands of the falling dust, the dust of the Creator. Well, Adam was too. Adam was made of dirt, right? So wasn't Gluskapi. We have many spirits: spirit of the woods, spirit of the drum, Adziozo, who is the creator of the lake. We have many spirits, but I also say so doesn't other people. How many Moses or the saints or whatever? I mean, they have important people. Like I think Saint Francis in the Catholic religion is the saint of the woods, or well, so isn't spirit of the woods for us. We call him Bigfoot or Big Hairy Man or whatever you want to call him, Yeti. I mean, he's the person who watches over the animals and the environment. So we ask him to watch over the animals and the land when we have songs to him. And people say, "Oh, that's nice myth." Like, well, they're spirits. They can manifest themselves so you can see them. You just can't catch them. Just like Champ, right? Or the underwater serpent, or like I said, or like spirit of the woods. They are spiritual beings who can manifest themselves, but you can't catch them. And people say, "Oh, that's nice." I'm like, well, what's the difference between somebody like Jesus appearing before the disciples after he was dead? He materialized so somebody can see him, but you couldn't catch him, or or the burning bushes, or the, I use that because I know we believe in different paths on the circle of life, right? We're just one of those entities. We're not dominion over, we are in partnership with. So anyway, I know sometimes you get into spiritual stuff, people kind of glaze over. Politics and spirituality is not really good subjects to get into. I mean, I do give spiritual talks and stuff at UVM, their interfaith stuff sometimes. So, but anyway, we could always talk more about that at some point. I'm going to finish up these last questions probably, if that's okay with people, and then we'll go from there. I'm working on partnerships to have a docudrama creating shows based entirely on facts and historical accounts, including journals, invasion of the Western Hemisphere, captive Africans from the active original inhabitants. I think about the film stuff, I think it's I think anytime you can educate about cultures in a historical, meaningful way, I think is a important thing to do. We have Jesse Bruchak. He helped with Saints and Strangers. He's done a few movies with our language, using our language as the underlying basis of the series. I think we might be doing something with John Fusco in the near future. He's a guy who did The Highwaymen. He's a big Hollywood film producer that I work with on Indigenous Peoples Day events. I think if you do it in a context that is not insulting, and you do it in a way that's meaningful. For instance, you've seen a lot of Westerns and shows where they portray Native people in all kinds of ways. That's not helpful. It just reinforces a stereotype. But like, say, for instance, if you're doing a documentary on why are we known as Redskins, right? Because that's pretty offensive. It became offensive. When Europeans came, we would rub red ochre on our faces and on our bodies to be close to the earth, and because it represented the blood and the earth of our mother, and it would dye our skin red. So Europeans would see us as red-skinned people. That is a fact. That is not insulting. That is a fact that we were red-skinned people. But when people turned it into redskins or used it in a different derogatory manner, even though it's the same word, then it changes the meaning and the significance of it, right? It becomes more of a derogatory thing than it is a factual thing. So it depends on the context that you're doing it in, and if it is it used for educational purposes or is it to reinforce a stereotype. So I think you have to get, if you're doing that, you have to get your facts kind of straight and make sure that you're doing it from not an implicit bias standpoint, right? Because that's the problem we run into is implicit bias, right? You all know what that is, and systemic racism. But you may not think you're doing something wrong, but based on your biases or your implicit biases, it may be out of context. So that's all I'm saying. So that's what I would is research and make sure that it's accurate or in a good way. So let's see. I think I got a couple more questions here. Natives were slaves before Africans even. Yeah, we were taken to the New World. I mean, I keep saying the New World. This is our world, our old world. We look at Europe as somewhere, some other, that's their world, Most people do not know that, unfortunately, right? Well, I think the most famous person who was taken overseas as a slave was, what was his name? He was Patuxet, the one that came over that met the Pilgrims and talked English to them. He was Wampanoag. He might have been Abenaki, but going to Wampanoag territory. He basically went over, came back, and then he met the English at Plymouth to actually talk to him about things. He was like the interpreter, but he survived. He was the only one left in his whole community. His whole community is wiped out from plague, and he happened to survive the plague and come back, and he was the only one left. Anyway, I don't remember the whole story because it's more Wampanoag story than it is ours. But there is evidence of some coming back, which very few, and basically could tell us what they saw over there. And most people don't know that the largest number of Native people that were hung was 38 of them, and on one day they were looked at as being criminals, and they considered them uprisers and hung 38 of them in one day. I mean, we were the brunt of the KKK and all of those bad things before people were here. I mean, well, obviously KKK came after. What I'm saying is Vermont's 98% white. There wasn't a lot of different ethnic minorities here in Vermont until the resettlement program. There were some black people, but they were a lot fewer than Abenaki. We were the ones that were targeted. There was a big KKK movement in Barrie that used to target us. Montana has a law requiring education. Yeah, we wish we did too. That's something that we should fight for, and if not mandate it, it should be the right thing to do. But also come with people who are hired to actually do it. Like I said, if they don't pay us to do that full time, then we have no chance. We can't do it when we work for somebody else. People don't pay me to do Native things during the day, right? They want me to do the job I'm hired for. So we really need the funding to be able to pay for those positions, to be those resources. But obviously, it's kind of ironic that even this day and age, we don't have anybody doing it full time because they won't provide the funds. I wonder why. Kind of surprising, huh? Let's see. Appreciate perspectives. Yep. So I think I've hit all of the questions. I mean, if you have anything else, I don't mind answering them, or we can maybe have another session someday if that's what you'd like, or maybe more opportunities within Champlain College to be able to sit down and discuss things, or even do a town hall sort of thing, because this almost turned into sort of like a town hall kind of thing, which is good because you get the answers that you are looking for, and I'm not just lecturing at you. You're kind of being able to, I can fulfill the needs that you have. So I do value these times. But anything you want to know, we'll do our best to. I'll do my best to be able to tell you what it is, or at least find out the information. But yeah, follow us. We're doing good things. Nulhegan is doing good. We're doing good things, and hopefully we can maybe even create. I think they were talking about maybe having a statue at some point that would be equal status as Champlain. But most people don't realize. I told your president when your students wanted to take down the statue, I'm like, you don't have to tear something down to lift something up, right? You don't have to circumvent one thing to be able to make something better. You have to either make it equal, but people have to understand that Champlain was actually an ally of the Abenaki. They actually helped us win our first battle. I mean, all Europeans are colonizers. We know that. But if you had any colonizer, at least Champlain was actually worked with us and allied with us, where the British did not. We were their enemy. So if anything, people have to understand that all Europeans wanted to work on behalf of their country. But we did have some allies and friends that did work with us to help us secure, even if it was for their own interest, to secure the fur trade and keep Lake Champlain free of being owned by the Iroquois and the British. The French had just as much interest of keeping the lake clear for fur trade as we did, not having our homeland invaded. So they only abandoned us after the French and Indian Wars decided to come to an end. So anyway, that's why there's a lot of Abenaki French lineage, because we intermixed with French, and they lived among us, intermarried with us, where British looked at Native people as subjects. So that's why the Six Nations were separated, and we were Christianized. And I always say, we had 400 years of Christianization. At what point does it become part of your culture, right? I mean, think about it. So, but we just look at it differently. So I appreciate it. I hope you have a good night. You have anything else for me, Kelsey?
No, I don't think so. Thank you very much for sort of rising to the occasion. Unfortunately, our other panel members seems could not make it tonight. So I really appreciate you sort of stepping up to the plate there and making it a panel of one. And I think I speak for everyone here when we say we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and answer all of our questions. And it was really great to hear from you, to hear, the opinion of somebody who actually works with these federal and state people to get the help that Native people need. So it was really great to hear from you. And we really appreciate a lot of the insights you were able to give us from a perspective that we just don't have on our own.
Well, I was happy to do it. So in our language, I'll say adio, nana walmazi. That means goodbye and take care, and we'll see you. We'll see you again at some point. It's never really goodbye. It's until we see you again. So
Thank you so much. You have a nice night.
you too. Stay safe and stay healthy, please.
You as well.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.